The galaxy had long since forgotten the Guardian, a myth, a story told to children by the fireside. A tale of a hero who once stood between humanity and its greatest enemies. Now, centuries later, humanity was beyond such legends, their technological advancements rendering the past irrelevant. The stars were theirs to conquer, their mighty fleets capable of wiping out entire civilizations. They had forgotten that such power, unchecked, could bring destruction just as easily as it could bring prosperity. But on the fringes of the galaxy, on a barren world lost in time, something stirred. The emergency signals had been faint at first, an anomaly detected on a remote planet, buried beneath layers of dust and debris. The planet was little more than an ancient ruin, its surface scarred by long-forgotten wars. No one had visited it in hundreds of years. But when a fleet of Axaloth warships suddenly appeared on the edges of human space, a wave of panic swept across the Galactic Council. A mysterious enemy, unknown to modern humanity, was attacking out of nowhere. It didn't take long for the Council to realize that they had no choice. The Axaloth were not a race to be taken lightly. They had advanced weaponry and tactics that rendered humanity's best efforts ineffective. A chilling truth took hold. Only one entity could stand against them. The one thing humanity had abandoned long ago, the Guardian. On board the flagship Regalia, a counselor turned to a team of scientists and ancient historians, an uneasy tension in the room. "Activate the protocol," the counselor commanded, his voice barely audible. The historian, though hesitant, nodded. "We have no choice. If we don't awaken the Guardian now, we might lose everything." With that, they initiated the ancient process, activating dormant technology from an era before the galactic expansion. Long ago, when humanity first learned the art of war, they had created the Guardian, a being of unmatched power, a living weapon born not of flesh, but of engineered perfection. They had forgotten, or perhaps never realized, that the Guardian's power was not just physical but also strategic, an intellect honed through countless battles. As the machinery hummed to life, deep in the heart of the forgotten temple, something stirred. The vast stone door, weathered and covered in centuries of moss, slowly groaned open. Light poured into the ancient chamber, revealing an imposing figure. The Guardian, once a towering silhouette in an age of darkness, now stood bathed in light, the power in their form resonating like a storm. The Guardian's eyes flickered as if awakening from a long, disorienting slumber. Their vision blurred, and memories scattered like broken shards of glass, glimpses of a past life, the echo of battles fought in distant worlds, the hum of weapons that sang with purpose, the roar of warships in the black void of space. But everything felt wrong, distant. The world around them had changed, yet the instinct to protect, to fight, burned brightly within them. A voice, cold and metallic, spoke from a nearby console. "Guardian, you are needed. The Axaloth have returned. You must protect humanity." The words hit like a blow, but the Guardian's mind raced. Humanity, the name sounded familiar, but there was so much they had forgotten. The last memory they could grasp was of a great war, a war that had cost them everything. Had humanity survived? Were they still as fragile as they once were? The voice persisted. "The Axaloth are not what they once were. They are more dangerous than before. You are humanity's last hope." The Guardian stood silent for a moment, calculating, weighing the options, but the decision was clear. If humanity needed protection, I would give it. With a single motion, the Guardians stepped forward, their armor gleaming with ancient strength. Their past was lost, but their purpose, simple and unyielding, remained. Humanity must survive, and the Guardian would see it done. The Guardian's first steps on the battlefield were nothing like they had imagined. They had once been a symbol of fear, an unstoppable force of nature. But now, emerging from a world long forgotten, the enemy was not just the Axaloth and their terrifying weaponry. No, The true battle lay in finding their place in a galaxy that had long since moved on from the horrors of the past. The universe had changed, humanity had changed, and they, the Guardian, had to change with it. The first encounter with the Axoloth was both a shock and a revelation. The Council, now led by a new generation of leaders who had never witnessed war, underestimated the Axoloth's capabilities. Their intelligence, once thought inferior, had evolved into something more insidious. The enemy wasn't just trying to conquer, they were calculating, manipulating. Each strike they made felt purposeful, as if they were playing a game the Guardian had not been prepared for. The Guardian had assumed they would be able to simply overpower the Axoloth with sheer force. Instead, they found themselves in an alien landscape of traps, ambushes, and psychological warfare. The first major engagement took place on the once thriving human colony of Voltaire 3. What was supposed to be a routine defense mission turned into a slaughter. When the Guardian arrived, they found a devastated city, its towering structures reduced to rubble, the sky thick with the smoke of burning fields. But there were no Axoloth troops in sight. Instead, they found a haunting silence. The citizens were gone. There was no sign of them, no bodies, no trace, just empty streets. It was as if the Axoloth had vanished into thin air. The Guardian scanned the area, the faintest trace of movement appearing in their enhanced vision. A trap, they realized, just as an explosion tore through the streets, ripping apart the ground beneath them. A few surviving human soldiers, caught off guard by the blast, managed to regroup, but the Guardian's priority was to find out what had happened to the people. As they moved deeper into the wreckage, the true scope of the Axoloth's strategy became clear. This wasn't just an invasion. The Axoloth had used the colony as bait, luring the Guardian into the heart of a trap designed to exploit their greatest weakness: a lack of knowledge about the current state of humanity and the tactics that had evolved since their long slumber. The Guardian was a relic, a weapon of a bygone era, and the Axoloth were no longer just a physical threat. They were playing with the Guardian's mind, using psychological warfare to unbalance them. Before the Guardian could react, a squadron of Axoloth warships descended from the clouds, firing upon the survivors below. The Guardian immediately ordered an evacuation for the remaining human soldiers, their instinct to protect overriding their confusion. But something was stirring in the back of their mind. Where are the civilians? It wasn't until the Guardian traced a signal from deep within the colony's abandoned center that the truth came to light. The Axoloth had taken the humans, not as slaves, but as experiments. A fleet of dark transports flew under the radar, whisking away their prize while the Guardian was distracted by the chaos. "They're using us," one of the surviving soldiers whispered in disbelief, looking up at the Guardian with wide eyes. "We're not the target. We were the diversion." The Guardian's anger flared, their old instincts kicking in, but they forced themselves to think. This was a new kind of war, one where brute force was no longer enough, and the Axoloth were smarter, more dangerous than ever. As the Guardian looked up into the dark sky, the faces of the lost civilians burned into their mind. The hunt has begun. This was no longer about just winning battles. It was about unraveling the enemy's mind, understanding their strategies, and outthinking them. The Guardian realized that they were no longer the tool of destruction they had once been. They were humanity's last hope, and humanity would have to learn how to fight with them, not just depend on them. The stakes were higher than ever, and the Guardian had only just begun to grasp the true nature of the war they were thrust back into. This fight would not be won through strength alone. It would be won through intelligence, ingenuity, and a bond between the past and the future of humanity. The days that followed the disastrous battle at Voltaire 3 were some of the most difficult the Guardian had ever faced. The Axoloth had slipped away, leaving behind only destruction and stolen lives. Their strategy was unfolding with terrifying precision. baiting humanity into traps while they slowly crippled the spirit of the galaxy. But it wasn't just the Exaloth who posed a threat anymore. As the Guardian began to strategize humanity's next moves, they discovered a more insidious danger lurking within. The Galactic Council, once united under the banner of human superiority, was fractured. The urgency of the situation had exposed old divisions. Some saw the Guardian as the key to winning the war, while others questioned the wisdom of trusting an ancient weapon with the future of humanity. There were those who had come to power by promoting peace and diplomacy, and they believed the Guardian's reappearance was a dangerous relic. The Council's discussions became heated, but one thing remained clear. The Exaloth were coming, and humanity's defenses were ill-prepared for the true scope of the threat. But a larger, more terrifying betrayal was unfolding behind closed doors. At a high-level council meeting, as the assembled leaders debated strategy, the Guardian was not invited to attend. Their presence, once revered, was now seen as a tool to be used at their convenience. The humans had grown comfortable with their technological advancements, and the idea of an ancient warrior standing beside them was starting to feel outdated. As the Guardians sat outside the meeting chamber, listening to muffled arguments, their thoughts were interrupted by a voice, a familiar one. Captain Leela Arden, one of the few officers the Guardian had come to trust, entered the room with urgency in her eyes. "Guardian, we need to talk," she whispered, pulling them aside. "What is it, Captain?" The Guardian's voice was low, cold, their eyes narrowing as they sensed the weight in her tone. "I've just learned something that—" Arden hesitated, her gaze flickering around to make sure no one was listening. "I've been monitoring the Council's communications. There's a faction within the Council, high-ranking officials, who've been secretly negotiating with the Exaloth." The Guardian's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, negotiating?" "They've been offering them something, power, influence in exchange for their cooperation. The Exaloth aren't just invading, they are being welcomed in certain circles. And I'm afraid these traitors are preparing to give them control over parts of human space." The Guardian felt a surge of disbelief and fury. Betrayal. Humanity was under attack, and yet some of its leaders were willing to hand over the future of their people to the very enemy they had once fought. This was more than just a political maneuver. It was a gross betrayal of the trust that had been placed in them. "Who's behind this?" the Guardian demanded, their voice growing colder, sharper. Arden hesitated, clearly torn. "I've identified the names: Councillor Drank, Senator Kalara, and—" She paused, her expression turning pale. "Admiral Severin." The last name hit the Guardian like a blow. Admiral Severin had been a trusted ally, a decorated hero of the last war, and one of the few officers the Guardian had come to rely on in their efforts to organize humanity's defenses. The thought that Severin could betray them to the Exaloth was unfathomable. "We have to stop this," Arden urged. "The longer we let this go on, the more damage they'll do. They'll hand us over to the Exaloth piece by piece until it's too late." The Guardian nodded, the weight of their newfound knowledge settling on them like a heavy cloak. They could feel the old fire stirring inside them, but this wasn't just a fight with weapons anymore. This was a battle for the soul of humanity, for the trust that had once been so unshakable. They couldn't do it alone. The people of the galaxy had to decide where their loyalties lay. With a solemn expression, the Guardian spoke. "We will expose this treachery, and when the time comes, we will make them answer for their crimes." But even as the words left their lips, the Guardian knew that the stakes had shifted. The war against the Exaloth was now intertwined with a civil war, a battle for the very foundation of humanity's future. The fate of the galaxy no longer rested solely on defeating an external enemy. It depended on whether humanity could rise above its own divisions and restore the unity that had once made them strong. The revelation of betrayal sent shockwaves through the Guardian's mind. The very people they had once protected, those they had fought beside, were now the enemy. Admiral Severin, Counselor Drank, and Senator Kalara, figures who had stood for humanity's best interests, now conspiring with the Kahaloth. The Guardian's sense of justice screamed for action, but they knew this was a delicate situation. They could not simply rush into confrontation. The consequences would be catastrophic. The galaxy was already on the brink of war, and if the truth about the traitors leaked before the Guardian could act, it might plunge humanity into chaos. The Guardian's mind raced with possibilities as they stood alone in the war room aboard the Regalia. Arden had left to gather evidence and alert a few trusted allies within the fleet, while the Guardian tried to piece together their next move. There had to be a way to expose the conspiracy without completely fracturing what little unity remained among the humans. They knew the clock was ticking. The Kahaloth were growing bolder with each passing day, and their attacks were becoming more devastating. With their human allies sabotaging efforts from within, the Guardian feared that the war was being lost before it had even begun. If humanity did not act decisively, the galaxy could fall into the Kahaloth's hands, and the traitors would have sealed their victory. Suddenly, an incoming transmission interrupted the Guardian's thoughts. It was from Commander Jorik, an old acquaintance and one of the few officers who had remained loyal to the cause. His face appeared on the holographic display, his expression grim. "Guardian," Jorik began, his voice urgent. "We've received word that the Kahaloth are planning something major, a fleet the size of which we've never seen before. They're massing near the orbital station of Velcron 7. If we don't intercept them now, they'll strike the core of human space." The Guardian's fists clenched at the news. Another attack. The Kahaloth had no mercy, and every moment of delay made the situation worse. "Do we have a plan?" the Guardian asked, their voice steady but filled with the weight of impending doom. "We do," Jorik replied, his eyes flashing with determination. "But it requires you to be at the forefront. You are humanity's strongest weapon. More than just a symbol, you're our hope. We've already gathered a fleet, but we need your strength to break through their defenses." The Guardian's mind raced. Hope. That word had taken on a new meaning. It was no longer a vague ideal, but a responsibility. Humanity had pinned their hopes on them, and now they had to prove they were worthy of that trust. "I'll lead the attack," the Guardian replied, the decision firm. "But I will need more than just firepower. We need to disrupt their strategy, force them into chaos. If we can cripple their command structure, we can win." Jorik nodded. "We've intercepted their communications, and we've learned something crucial. The Kahaloth rely heavily on their command ships to coordinate their forces. If we take out their flagship, the rest of their fleet will fall apart." The Guardian's eyes narrowed. The plan was risky, but it had a chance. Disrupting the Kahaloth's command would throw them into disarray, buying humanity the time it needed to regroup and fight back. But it would take more than strength and strategy to succeed. It would take precision and timing, traits the Guardian hadn't used in centuries, but ones that had once made them invincible. "Prepare the fleet," the Guardian ordered. "We leave at once. We'll strike before they realize what's coming for them." With a nod, Jorik's image flickered out, and the Guardian turned toward the star map displayed before them. Their pulse quickened as they examined the coordinates. The Kahaloth fleet was indeed massive, a deadly force that could turn the tide of war. But the Guardian had faced odds like these before, and the odds had never been in the enemy's favor. As the ships prepared for launch, the Guardian felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't the calm of overconfidence, but the calm of someone who knew the stakes. They had fought wars before, wars that had shaped the very fabric of humanity's future, and now they would fight for that future again. The same fire that had once made them humanity's protector had never truly gone out. It had only slumbered, waiting for the right moment to reignite. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, heading for Velcron 7. The first move had been made, but the battle was far from over. The Guardian could feel it. This was only the beginning. The Faloth might have the upper hand, but they had underestimated humanity's resilience. They had underestimated the Guardian, and they would soon learn that even the darkest forces could not extinguish the light of hope. The moment the Guardian's fleet arrived in the vicinity of Velcron 7, the magnitude of the Exaloth presence was immediately apparent. The orbital station, a symbol of human ambition and expansion, was now surrounded by a dense armada of warships. Their dark hulls gleamed like obsidian against the backdrop of the planet's glittering atmosphere, and a heavy tension hung in the air. The Exaloth were ready for battle, and they had no intentions of surrendering the space station without a fight. The Guardians stood at the helm of the Regalia, the flagship of the human fleet, their minds sharpening with each passing moment. Jorg's intelligence had been accurate. The Exaloth fleet was indeed formidable, but their strength was not insurmountable. The key was taking down their command ship, the Oblivion's Wrath, a massive vessel that towered over the rest of their fleet. It was their heart, their brain. Take it out, and the Exaloth forces would disintegrate. But there was one problem. The Oblivion's Wrath was heavily shielded and surrounded by layers of defense. It was a fortress, a moving stronghold, and breaking through it would require more than just firepower. "Captain Arden, prepare the fleet," the Guardian commanded, their voice cutting through the air with quiet authority. "We'll need to draw their attention and create an opening for a surgical strike. Once we've taken out their flagship, the rest will scatter." "Yes, sir," Arden replied, her voice steady despite the pressure. She had long since earned the Guardian's trust, and now she was ready to follow them into the fire once again. The battle began with a deafening roar as the human fleet unleashed its weapons in unison, a symphony of destruction that sent shockwaves through space. Laser fire and missile barrages filled the sky, aimed at the enemy's outer ships. The Exaloth fleet responded in kind, retaliating with ferocity, their ships darting in and out of formation like a swarm of deadly predators. The Guardian's mind was focused, calculating. As human vessels engaged the Faloth's front lines, the Guardian pushed forward, the Regalia cutting through the chaos, heading directly for the Oblivion's Wrath. The plan was to get close enough to the flagship to launch a precise strike at its weak points, its engines, its command center, before the enemy could mount an effective counterattack. But the Exaloth had not been caught off guard. As the human fleet surged forward, the Oblivion's Wrath deployed a massive defensive grid, a network of drones and automated turrets that swarmed like a cloud of angry wasps. These drones, faster and more agile than the human ships, harried the fleet, weaving through incoming fire while launching deadly plasma bursts in return. The Guardian's ship bucked under the barrage, but the Guardian remained unfazed. Their hand tightened around the control yoke, every instinct now tuned to the battle at hand. They could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on them, the lives of so many, all depending on this moment. "Captain, initiate the flanking maneuver," the Guardian ordered, their voice unwavering. "Give me a clear path to the flagship. I'll take it from there." Arden's voice crackled over the comms. "Understood, sir. Stand by." In the blink of an eye, the human fleet shifted, its ships pulling back and flanking the Exaloth positions on either side. The sudden change in tactics caught the Exaloth off guard. The drones that had been harassing the human fleet now found themselves pinned between two fronts, and the gaps in their defensive formation widened. Now was the moment. The Guardian, with Arden's guidance, piloted the Regalia through the tumult, weaving between drones and blasts, moving toward the Oblivion's Wrath like an unstoppable force. The immense flagship loomed before them, its vast hull pockmarked with defense systems, its energy shields glowing a fierce, unnatural blue. The Guardian's eyes narrowed. "Targeting system online," the ship's AI announced, its calm tone in stark contrast to the chaos outside. "Fire," the Guardian commanded, their voice as cold as the vacuum of space itself. The Regalia fired a barrage of concentrated firepower, beams of energy striking the Oblivion's Wrath's shields in rapid succession. The flagship's defenses shimmered with the impact, but they held firm, repelling each attack. It was a costly battle, one that demanded precision, and the Guardian was known for precision. Another strike hit, then another, and another. Finally, a critical weakness appeared, a vulnerable spot along the flagship's midsection where its shield had weakened under the relentless barrage. The Guardian's ship surged forward, engaging the final phase of the assault. "Captain, brace for impact," Arden warned, her voice filled with tension. The regalia closed the distance. The Guardian activated the ship's warp drive at full power, diving through the heart of the Oblivion's Wrath's defenses, like an arrow aimed straight at the bullseye. The moment of truth arrived. With a deafening roar, the regalia's weapons unleashed a devastating blow to the flagship's weak point, and for a split second, time seemed to stand still. Then came the explosion, a massive eruption of light and energy as the Oblivion's Wrath was torn apart, its mighty structure collapsing in on itself, sending shockwaves through the Xaloth fleet. The Guardian felt a surge of triumph, but they knew this battle was far from over. The Xaloth had lost their command center, but they were not a force to be taken lightly. They would retaliate. Humanity's victory here was a fleeting moment of light in the darkness, but it was a moment nonetheless. The explosion of the Oblivion's Wrath sent ripples through the battlefield, but the victory was short-lived. The moment the flagship's destruction echoed through the void, the Xaloth fleet momentarily faltered, its coordination splintering. But the Guardian knew better than to assume the battle was over. The Xaloth were resilient, adaptive, and their true strength lay in their ability to recover from devastation with terrifying speed. Within moments, the enemy reformed their lines, regrouping with a speed and precision that sent a chill through the Guardian's core. It became apparent that the destruction of the Oblivion's Wrath had not crippled the Xaloth. They had anticipated the loss and had already prepared their next move. The human fleet, still riding the momentum of the initial strike, found itself facing a far more dangerous force than it had ever encountered. "Captain Arden," the Guardian said, their voice calm despite the rising tide of urgency, "we need to press the advantage while we have it. They may be regrouping, but their fleet is disorganized. We must exploit their weakness." "Yes, sir," Arden replied, her voice steady, "but we've suffered significant casualties. The fleet is not in a position to fight a prolonged engagement." The Guardian turned their gaze to the tactical display, scanning the remaining Xaloth ships. Though disarrayed, the enemy had not lost their fighting spirit. Their smaller, faster ships darted between the larger warships, launching surgical strikes at the human fleet. But the real danger lay in the massive, unknown vessel that had emerged from the wreckage of the Oblivion's Wrath. It was larger than any ship they had seen before, sleeker, more angular, and adorned with an eerie, blood-red glow. "What in the galaxy is that?" Arden muttered, her eyes wide in disbelief. The Guardian's expression hardened. "I don't know, but it's their next move. We need to take it out before it has a chance to deploy its forces." As the mysterious vessel powered up its engines, a terrifying realization dawned upon the Guardian. The Xaloth were not just regrouping, they were adapting. This was no ordinary warship. It was a command ship, one unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, and it was already charging weapons. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," the Guardian barked, their hand gripping the controls. "All ships, focus fire on that vessel. We cannot let it complete its charge." A volley of concentrated fire from the human fleet rained down on the new flagship, but the Xaloth ship's shields flared to life, absorbing the energy without faltering. It was like trying to break through the surface of a diamond with a hammer, futile and draining. The ship's weapons fired back, and the human fleet was forced to scatter, avoiding the deadly beams that sliced through space like bolts of lightning. "Damn it," Arden swore as the regalia rocked under the impact of an enemy blast. "We need more firepower, or we're not going to make it out of here." The Guardian's mind raced. The battle was spiraling out of control. The fleet had been too reliant on sheer strength to overcome the HFY, but now it was clear that brute force alone wasn't enough. The enemy had evolved, and they had learned from their earlier mistakes. They were no longer just an enemy to be destroyed. They were a force to be reckoned with, and humanity's hope rested on adapting just as quickly. "Captain, there's a weakness," the Guardian said suddenly, their eyes narrowing as they analyzed the enemy flagship. "Its energy core is exposed, just beneath the hull. If we can target it with a focused strike, we might have a chance." Arden nodded. "How do we get close enough to make that shot?" "We don't need to get close," the Guardian replied. "We're going to use their own weapons against them." The Guardian's fingers flew over the control panel as they began rerouting energy to the Regalia's weapons. "Prepare a feint. We'll make them think we're retreating, then hit them from behind." The human fleet began a controlled withdrawal, feigning panic as they pulled back from the enemy flagship. The HFY, sensing an opportunity to finish off the remaining human forces, pursued with deadly determination. The Guardian gripped the yoke of the Regalia, guiding the ship through the retreat as if it were a dance. "Now," the Guardian shouted. With precision, the fleet reversed course, and the Regalia leaped from the retreat into an all-out assault. The concentrated fire from the human fleet, now redirected and focused, slammed into the enemy flagship's vulnerable core. It was a gamble, one the Guardian had no choice but to take. The flagship's shields flickered as the shots landed. For a moment, it seemed as if the enemy might withstand the barrage, but then, just as the Guardian had hoped, the shields failed. A brilliant explosion erupted from the core of the HFY vessel, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The flagship, now critically damaged, veered off course, its once mighty frame collapsing inward as it spiraled toward destruction. A cheer erupted from the human fleet as the HFY flagship fell. The enemy's forces, now without their primary command vessel, faltered. The Guardian knew that the HFY were not easily defeated, but the destruction of their new flagship had shaken them. "Good work, Captain," the Guardian said, their voice filled with the rare satisfaction of a hard-won victory. "But don't get comfortable, we've only just begun." The Guardian knew that this was merely a reprieve. The HFY would not give up easily, and there were still traitors within humanity's ranks who would do everything they could to see their species fall. But for now, the enemy had been dealt a blow, and hope had flickered brighter in the darkest corner of the galaxy. The victory at Velcron 7 had been hard-won, but the human fleet could not afford to rest on its laurels. The destruction of the HFY flagship had thrown their forces into disarray, but the Guardian knew that it would only be a matter of time before the enemy adapted once more. The war was far from over, and humanity's victory had been a mere battle in a much larger, relentless conflict. As the fleet moved back into formation, preparing for the next stage of the campaign, the Guardian's thoughts were elsewhere, haunted by the unsettling truth that still hung over their head: the betrayal within humanity's ranks. The traitors who had allied with the HFY, those they had trusted, were still out there, and their role in this war was far from clear. If the enemy knew how to strike back so quickly after the loss of their flagship, then the traitors' knowledge of human strategy must be just as valuable. The Guardian stood on the bridge of the Regalia, gazing out into the vast, star-filled void. The battle at Velcron 7 had shown the potential of humanity's strength, but the scars left by the betrayal ran deeper. The Admiral, the Counselor, and the Senator, three key figures in the war effort, now revealed as enemies. The question that gnawed at the Guardian was why. What had driven these individuals to betray their own kind? What had the HFY promised them that had led them to the darkest of paths? "Guardian," Arden's voice broke through their thoughts. She stood at the edge of the command center, her face etched with concern. "There's something you need to see." The Guardian turned to her, nodding silently. Arden stepped forward, handing them a datapad. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of encrypted transmissions. The Guardians' eyes narrowed as they began to analyze the data. The messages were traced back to a hidden network within the military command. It didn't take long to identify the source. Admiral Severin's encrypted signature was unmistakable. "What is this?" the Guardian asked, their voice cold with realization. Arden hesitated. "It's a series of communications between Severin and Exaloth command structure. But what's more disturbing is the timeline. These transmissions started well before we even engaged the Exaloth at Velcron 7. The Guardian's heart clenched. The treachery had been years in the making. The Exaloth had been planning their infiltration of humanity's leadership for far longer than anyone had realized. The attack on Velcron 7 had only been a single part of their larger scheme, orchestrated by those within the human hierarchy itself. It wasn't just a betrayal of the military or the government, it was a betrayal of everything humanity stood for. "This isn't just a war," the Guardian said, their voice barely above a whisper. "It's a coup." Arden's eyes widened as the weight of the realization sank in. The Guardian's mind raced, piecing together the fragmented bits of information. Severin had been a key figure in the military, trusted by many, and his involvement in the conspiracy made him an even more dangerous threat. But it wasn't just Severin. The Counselor Drank had long been rumored to have interests in galactic politics beyond the boundaries of the human race. Kalara, the senator, had always been a hawk, advocating for expansion at any cost. All of them had been working toward the same goal. The Guardian turned toward Arden, their expression hardening. "We need to expose this. Now, if we don't, the war will be lost before it even begins." Arden nodded, her face grim. "How do we do that without tipping off the traitors? They'll move to silence us the moment they realize we know." "I'll take care of that," the Guardian said. "I'll meet with a few trusted officers and leaders. We need to form a coalition, those who are still loyal to humanity. We'll need to strike quickly before they can consolidate their power." Arden hesitated. "And what about Severin, Drank, Kalara?" The Guardian's eyes burned with a cold fire. "They will face justice, but that will come later. First, we must survive. We can't afford to let them destroy what little we have left." Just as the Guardian prepared to leave the bridge, a sudden alarm blared throughout the ship. The sound was deafening, a sharp warning of impending danger. The display flickered, and a new message appeared on the screen. It was from a source that had been encrypted beyond the Guardian's ability to trace it until now. It was a direct transmission from Admiral Severin. "The Guardian," the message began, his voice eerily calm. "I know you've uncovered the truth. It's only a matter of time before you try to expose us. But know this, if you continue down this path, the consequences will be far worse than you can imagine. We will burn this galaxy to the ground if necessary, and you will be the one who falls." The transmission ended, leaving the room heavy with the threat of impending doom. The Guardian's jaw clenched, but they knew what had to be done. "It started," they said, their voice barely above a whisper. "The war within our own ranks." The message from Admiral Severin reverberated through the bridge of the regalia like a death knell. The Guardian stood motionless, staring at the blank screen where Severin's cold, mocking words had just disappeared. The threat was unmistakable. Humanity's greatest betrayal was not just a political maneuver, it was a war within a war. And now, the Guardian had to navigate this new, treacherous battlefield. "We need to move quickly," the Guardian said, their voice steady but hard, each word a weight. "Prepare the fleet for immediate departure. We're going to make a move on the traitors before they can solidify their hold." Arden, ever vigilant, nodded. "Where do we begin? Severin's network is massive. If we're going to stop this, we'll need more than just a handful of loyal officers." "We have more than that," the Guardian replied, their eyes narrowing. "It's not just the military. Severin's alliance stretches into the highest echelons of government and industry. We'll need to expose the conspiracy in its entirety, force the public into seeing what's been happening behind closed doors. If we can ignite a rebellion in the people, it will be harder for Severin to maintain control. We can't fight the entire galaxy, Guardian, Arden cautioned. The Exala threat hasn't gone away. We'll be spread too thin. The Guardian paused, their gaze fixed on the stars outside. The weight of their responsibility hung heavily on their shoulders. The Exalath, though dangerous, were now a secondary threat. The true battle for humanity's survival lay in reclaiming the soul of the species, eradicating the rot from within. We'll split our forces. A small contingent will focus on securing key locations and leaders loyal to humanity. The rest of the fleet will hold the Exaloth at bay. We'll make it look like we're still fighting them, buying us time. Arden's eyes darkened with understanding. And you'll confront Severin. The Guardian nodded. It's time to bring this to an end. Hours later, the Regalia and the fleet were in motion, splitting into two forces. The Guardian's ship led a covert assault on a well-guarded fortress world, home to several of the government officials who had aligned with the Kaloth. It was a carefully calculated strike designed to take out the traitors without alerting Severin's agents. The loyalists in the fleet had been briefed on their roles, and every move was executed with precision. As they approached the heavily fortified world, the Guardian's mind remained focused, every ounce of their being dedicated to the task at hand. They knew that the outcome of this mission would determine humanity's future. They could not afford to fail. The Regalia descended into the atmosphere, its sleek frame cutting through the dense clouds, descending toward the high-security complex where several key figures in the conspiracy were holed up. On the ground, a small battalion of elite soldiers, handpicked by the Guardian, prepared for their assault. They had been briefed on the stakes, and there was no room for error. The air crackled with tension as the ground team infiltrated the compound. The Guardian's heart pounded in their chest as they approached the central control room, the place where Severin's most trusted allies had been orchestrating their machinations. The moment of truth had arrived. The doors to the control room burst open, and inside, surrounded by holographic displays of political and military intelligence, stood Admiral Severin. He was calm, a faint smirk curling his lips, as if he had known this moment was coming. "Guardian," Severin said, his voice icy, yet filled with a strange amusement. "Did you really think you could stop what's already been set in motion? The galaxy is mine to rule. Humanity will be nothing more than a tool in the hands of those who truly understand its potential." The Guardian's eyes narrowed. "You've betrayed your own people for the sake of power, Severin. You'll never see your plans come to fruition." Severin chuckled softly. "You don't get it, do you? This was never about power. It was about survival. Humanity was doomed to fall, consumed by its own ambitions. The Exaloth offer us a future beyond your small-minded vision of what humanity could be. We will rise above the chaos, and you, Guardian, will be nothing but a footnote in history." A sharp pang of anger twisted in the Guardian's chest, but they remained focused, their voice steady. "If this is what you call survival, then I'm glad I'm not part of your future." Before Severin could react, the Guardian gave the order, and the room exploded in a flurry of motion. The loyalists in the room, who had been covertly working alongside the Guardian, moved with deadly precision. The battle was over quickly, Severin's personal guards neutralized, and his once proud control room rendered useless. As the final blows were struck, the Guardian turned to Severin, who had fallen to the ground, his eyes wide with disbelief. The betrayal had been exposed, but there was no triumph in the Guardian's heart. This victory felt hollow, a bitter reminder of what had been lost. "You were wrong," the Guardian said softly, their voice carrying the weight of a galaxy's worth of pain. "Humanity was always meant to rise, not under the Exaloth, but on its own terms." Severin sneered, blood dripping from his mouth. "It's too late, you've already lost." The Guardian's expression softened, but their resolve remained unshaken. "Not today." With that, Severin's reign came to an end. The true war for humanity's soul was far from over, but the Guardian had struck a blow against its most insidious enemies. There would be more battles, more struggles, but the first step had been taken. The rebellion had begun. As the regalia ascended back into space, the Guardian stood alone on the bridge, staring out at the stars. The galaxy was vast, its future uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, the Guardian felt a flicker of hope. Humanity had stood against its darkest hour, and it had not fallen. Not yet.